Welcome back to another video of Finding Freedom. We're going to discuss why military veterans are great at business and why some of them reside at the top of the largest companies. I mean, especially if they have a GWOT. Now, in business, you use a SWOT analysis. Take the S out and put a G there, and it spells GWOT. But let's get into it because there's certain things like clarity, understanding, communication, linguistics, and things like that. And so, to give you a simplistic word like evolved, right? If you've seen other videos of mine, I discuss the term healthcare, which would probably stand for heal them and care, but the E and M aren't there, so people have to fill in the blanks. So if we take the word evolved, right, and we were to separate it, well, the word love in there is spelt backwards, and then you have the word dev. Now, people talk about us being in the matrix and things like that. So, who's not better to love than an architect or a developer, right? Within programming or anything else. Then, of course, I pulled that information into not only a large language model, but of course, I cross-referenced it with psychology as well as the public law library and some medical books, and it actually discusses it right here actually. So I could go ahead and share this link with you if you guys want. Go ahead and put that in the chat so we can educate some people. However, when it talks about these things, so on and so forth, it's not linguistically attached to etymology, right? However, in different areas, it does have specific meaning, or can, right? In different systems of meaning. So words can be treated as containers. So if you're a developer or programmer, your brackets, your parentheses, when you're typing code up, etc., you would understand this. And of course, if you're into mathematics, you would as well. So words are treated as containers, meaning they can be extracted through reversal, phonetics, segmentation, resonance, tonal emphasis, as well as symbolic association. So the word evolved, right? And I'll show you here. Let me bring this up, etc. I don't know if you guys could see that, but it's there. So the word evolved has the word love reversed, and then of course dev for development. Let me put these on because it's a little bright out here. And I don't want anybody technical to start tweaking stuff in the video. So let's continue. As symbolic decoding, this is valid. As intentional encoding, this is plausible. And then, of course, as linguistic origin, it can be false. Now, historical precedent for this kind of encoding. Well, some of you who study esoteric teachings, mysticism, so on and so forth, such as Christian mysticism, those with ears, right? Right? Those with ears to hear. So those with ears, let them hear. Those with eyes, let them see, right? So on and so forth. The Hebrew Kabbalah, gematria, letter inversion, phonetic play, so on and so forth. Greek mystery schools, layered in meaning by sound and structure, not so much the actual spelling of certain things. Then you have things like alchemy. Text is written so only the initiated can decode them. And then, of course, you have things like Freemasonry and esoteric Christianity, symbolism over literary meaning, right? So to see beyond the veil, etc., or past the smoke. So where this becomes dangerous, right? So if symbolic decoding is treated as literal historical fact, that can be dangerous. Universal truth for all readers, that might be dangerous. It can collapse into pattern overreach. In other words, how do I say this? It would keep someone's mind in limbo. They might go crazy, so on and so forth, right? Some psychologists might understand the terminology being utilized. In essence, the brain will spin out of control, or it'll start to look for other associations, and people will 9 times out of 10 go crazy. Unless they're trained a certain way or they are able to have structure, discipline, and to know when to stop or quit. Most people don't. Now, the power, when used as intentional encoding, personal gnosis, GNOSIS, kind of like hypnosis, but different. philosophical or spiritual teachings. By the way, if you've seen class or have not, please go check it out. It's a way of thinking better. It's an online philosophical lecture filled with, well, creativity, logic, art, science, spirituality, my opinions, ideology, and meanings behind each lesson. And there's going to be a total of 50 lessons, well, to represent the 50 states of America and the 50 stars on the flag. I'll let you guys figure out the rest from there. But then again, the power also, getting back into this, art, myth, and of course, well, language. It becomes a legitimate how do I say this? But legitimate interpretive lens. Interpretive lens. Sorry, legitimate interpretive lens. That's what I'm trying to say. So go ahead and hit that smash. How do I say this? Not go ahead and hit that smash. Go ahead and hit that like button and smash share. And don't forget to subscribe. As you can see, there's no edits in this, so you can see and hear and feel everything through screen, cameras, tonality, and pitch as far as, well, this is not something that has been edited or whatever the case. If it has been, then not only will I know, but other people will know as well. So let's get into some things that are important. So clean synthesis, right? Languages evolve unintentionally. Codes are applied intentionally, right? Spiritual traditions often layer meaning onto language after the fact, and then sound reversal and segmentation are ancient tools of encoding. So if your interpretation works, if and only if you treat it as a symbolic decoding, not linguistic proof. Now, what does this have to do with a GWOT, or what does this have to do with a SWOT analysis, business, etc., so on and so forth? See, when it comes to certain personnel and certain jobs, so on and so forth, right, there's certain things that they learn, right? They learn how to break things down Barney style, take the complex and simplify it. Now, this may scare other individuals that may be in positions of power or that have positions of control that want to silence, mitigate, or manipulate certain situations so that their plans can go to fruition, and then they'll punish you in return, hoping and not knowing, right? Now, you can't have that in a functional, effective business, especially if it's willing to grow or wanting to, right? The way to increase chances of success is to nullify that, because some people within the civilian sector, I'll leave it there, have what's known in martial arts as black belt fever. They know just enough to be dangerous. It's like getting your degree in psychology, but not actually putting it into practice. It's like becoming a brown belt in martial arts, not a black belt or a black belt instructor, but thinking that you have all the tools and everything necessary. You have all the tools necessary to be dangerous, but not as effective as an instructor, teacher, or practitioner would be, if that makes sense, right? So you may loosely utilize cognitive biases. You may loosely utilize switching your personality or your tonality, the way you pitch your story to different individuals to, well, leverage sympathy, empathy, or manipulate those emotions. But people can normally see through the facade, and if they can't, because, well, they're trying to give people benefit of the doubt, eventually the truth will come out. And if somebody is being recorded or has been recorded, it'll definitely come out. So, final answer to this, plainly stated, yes, English vocabulary can be used as code, and evolved can symbolically read as love developed, right? Now, the reason why I bring this up is because, well, past relationships, everybody's like, oh, it's called love, it's called this, it's called that. And how do you get someone to, well, evolve and develop as an individual? Well, you have positive reinforcement, negative reinforcement. This is also utilized in military trainings throughout their whole career. You get a page 11, a NJP. You go to court martial. You have pros and cons, your proficiency and conduct scores, so on and so forth. You have tests that you have to take, etc. You have a chain of command. You have to understand communication. You have to understand different units have different communication. The Air Force doesn't talk like the Army, and the Army doesn't talk like the Navy, and the Navy and Marines kind of get along because we're a department of the Navy. Now, if you remember, I think it was a lesson in class or another video, In Finding Freedom, I talked about how we got reprimanded for speaking a certain way on a different military installation with a different branch, so on and so forth, because our language came off slightly aggressive and they weren't used to that. It hurt their ears or something. I don't know. But let's get into it, shall we? So, when it comes to positive versus negative enforcement, key correction. First, technical clarification, important in psychology. And if you've ever seen any of my other videos, I discuss psychology, sociology, social dynamics from when I was studying Erich von Markovitch and Neil Strauss and things like that, because I was a nerd and a geek. But anyways, so positive reinforcement, adding something positive to increase behavior, praise, encouragement, rewards. Negative reinforcement, not equal to punishment, but it means removing something unpleasant to increase behavior, blacklisting somebody, not letting them go back into a different area, so on and so forth. You don't like what somebody's saying, so you try to silence them. Then they continue, so you try to get your people to help you out, so they give them a medical diagnosis or they make one up. You tell other actors or players on the field to treat someone a certain way to trigger the label, so on and so forth. And the thing kind of snowballs because it's a group mindset, right? So let's get into this, right? So what evidence shows when it comes to positive reinforcement? This is based on psychology, right? Now, granted, this is an outline, but this might be a little lengthy video for some of you. Don't worry, it's getting interesting, and it's always been interesting. So check this out. Research consistently shows when it comes to positive reinforcement, it increases intrinsic motivation. So if you're in business, you know something about intrinsic value, right? And when it comes to positive reinforcement, there's who is it? Pitbull, right? So Pitbull tells the story about when kids are trying to walk, so on and so forth, everybody's encouraging them, right? You fall, come on, get back up, you're perfectly fine, dust yourself off, keep going, so on and so forth. But then as you age, people have been hypnotized or spelled to not carry those same behaviors out. So when you go to try to go to law school or medical school or start your own business or whatever, they might look at you and be like, why did you do that? So on and so forth. Or don't say you want to start a business, etc., utilizing fear and things like that. Then, of course, you have other tactics that they utilize. They put you down. You're not smart enough. You don't have this piece of paper. You don't have that piece of paper. And, eventually that person either gives up or just pushes those people away and disappears. And then they have this thing where they're like, I don't know what happened to them. They were trying to start a business, blah, blah, blah. And I told them it was never going to work, etc. Or I told them they were never going to be able to do it because they won't let you, right? Who's they, first of all, right? So you have to identify those factors. But let's continue with positive reinforcement because it worked to get people to conform, to get them to walk like you, to talk like you, to sound like you. But the moment they wanted to do something you didn't want them to do, or better themselves, or go after something, magically the negativity came out. So let's talk about positivity first before we get into the negative stuff. So continuing, after intrinsic motivation, it strengthens self-efficiency. It also promotes identity level growth. It also builds long-term behavioral change as well as supports psychological safety. Now, if this is done in a manner that is fake, right? So let's say you hire a prostitute to pretend to be somebody's girlfriend or whatever, or be nice to them, right? They're going to see and get a feeling over time that it's fake, right? Or you hire an escort, whatever terminology you want to use, right? They call it other terms in different worlds, but you can ask Andrew Bustamante about that. So key theories, self-determination theory. This was by, Disa and Ryan. Operant conditioning, that's Skinner, correctly applied. And then, of course, the growth mindset that Tony Robbins discussed. People grow faster and deeper when they feel valued, competent, autonomous, and supported. Now let's talk about punishment and negativity. But first, let's do a mic check. We're still good. So, punishment and negativity. Negative emotional experiences activate a part of the brain known to release something called the threat system, right? Your flight or flight and all this other stuff. Increases stress hormones like cortisol. And if you know this, you put stress on a structure, it's bound to collapse due to the amount of stress if it wasn't built or designed or orchestrated or fortified to handle such weight. So let's say you have a cancer gene, or everybody has a cancer gene or something else, right? And somebody is trying to put more stress. A group effort now is trying to cover each other's tracks because let's say a doctor messed up with a misdiagnosis. So now the whole team has to jump in because that would be a large lawsuit and a serious case, right? But they're not going to do that. But then again, it gets portrayed in TV shows like The Resident on Netflix with the doctor who killed a person during surgery and then got everybody to cover for him. So think about that, right? Because if you put stress on a structure, cortisol raises blood pressure and everything else. It's very bad for you. So it could give you a heart attack and all these other things if other things are also affecting the body. Now, bias memory toward fear-based recall. It reduces creativity and exploration. So if you are a creative person, let's say you're a Galileo figure and people don't like what you're saying, they will give negative reinforcement and punishments similar to Galileo. Galileo said the earth was round and they threw his ass in jail. Why? Because they didn't like what he was saying. Back then, they didn't have the term cancel culture. They just threw you in jail, right? They had prosecution, right? Guilty till whatever. Not guilty, but guilty. And then they treated the person as such without understanding, right? So let's continue. Condition avoidance, and that's not growth, right? So people will go ahead and isolate and all these other things, right? So think about that. So it says here that you are correct that negative experiences are encoded more strongly into long-term memory. This is due to, well, negativity bias, and I mentioned cognitive biases before. This is part of the evolutionary survival mechanism. But strong memory does not equal a healthy development. It produces compliance, not internalized growth, right? Now, when it comes to sociology and social dynamics, positive environments create a pro-social behavior. It increases cooperation. It encourages self-regulation, right? Because you have checks and balances in a positive environment, right? Don't drink too much. We're going to do this afterwards. We're going to have fun, etc. Don't do this or don't get in trouble, etc. Right? Because you have checks and balances, it's positive, so everybody tries to maintain that dynamic, right? Encourages self-regulation. So that's that. Produces leaders, not followers, right? So if you want to produce leaders, you have to put them in certain situations and environments, but make sure that it's monitored all the time, even if there are negative things that have to happen, right? They scale well across communities. So positive environments normally tend to scale. And if you're in business, scaling is something you want your business to do. Yes or no? And the way to do that and to increase word of mouth marketing is to, well, give your employees as well as your customers a positive experience, right? And then constructive criticism, right? Now, negative environments creates conformity under pressure, right? It fosters resentment or rebellion. You know about the Boston Tea Party, etc. Reinforce power hierarchies, right? So if there is a power structure, so on and so forth. I know we had the no kings thing, not to knock on anybody within the royal family, but monarchies or let's say government, etc. You have your mayor, your governor, your senator, politician, vice president, president, so on and so forth, right? It reinforces the hierarchies. I don't like what you're saying about this individual that's in power, so we're going to give you a negative experience as well as punish you on top of it, etc. So you don't do it again. It's like getting an ass whooping as a child or an adult, right? And then, of course, it leads to disengagement once external pressure is removed, meaning the person will self-remove themselves. And if they were groomed or have psychological features such as being exposed to 22 a day or people that do Mission 22 that sometimes assist people with carrying out 22 a day because of their ideology, then you are messing with the wrong individuals if they were trained differently to push back. And now it explains everything else, so on and so forth. Sociologically, love-based reinforcement builds culture. Fear-based reinforcement builds control, right? So think about that. Only one produces a sustainable society. Look at the media, look at what's happening, and look what's being portrayed. Do you think we're a sustainable society, or there's going to be a downfall that's coming and building up, right? So when negativity can have a limited role, right? So this is important nuance because negativity does have to happen. You have to go to the gym to get sore if you worked out correctly in order to have stronger muscles and be developed, right? But let's get into the specifics, right? So there are narrow cases where controlled negative feedback can be useful, right? Immediate danger, i.e., former military training. But if you're used to that type of explicit danger and that dramatic of a sort type of events, if you're running a business and you hear something, so on and so forth, and you're used to having people above you and below you, or let's say you're running the business, people will feel more not complacent but safer with somebody who's able to deal with those chaotic events versus somebody who is not, that falls into panic and everything else. And if they tend to have signs or symptoms of anxiety, they're going to freak out and do the wrong thing, thinking the assumption that they were doing the right thing, but they were just trying to protect themselves because of the psychology, and they didn't have a leader to look up to, so on and so forth. That was leading by example, right? So boundary enforcement, right? So this is another one, right? So immediate danger, that's when, negative stuff is somewhat has a limited role. When you're trying to, well, have boundary reinforcement, right? People will say, oh, you got to set up boundaries. You got to set up boundaries. The same person that said the thing about love, right? It's called love. It's called love, right? You got to set up boundaries. And then people keep pushing through your boundaries, right? And then they don't respect your boundaries. You put your phone on do not disturb, they call you anyways, and somehow it gets through. You move 40 minutes away, somehow they don't like what you're doing because you're in your house, your own apartment, but they still want to go ahead and cause trouble because some army ranger called them, etc., and said you were doing something weird walking around, etc., but they were really carrying out a cover-up, right? Or whatever the case may be. And because the individual with anxiety or who was psychologically manipulated doesn't want to get fired or in trouble, etc., because they're a good girl or boy, so on and so forth, and they don't know how to push back similarly to, let's say, a military personnel would do, right? They call it the good old boys club or something like that. We would say that in the Marines or somewhere else where you do push back, etc. But there's other individual agencies that use similar slogans. It's like people in business or kids that play video games that want to use military jargon to sound and feel cool without having proper understanding, right? They take things at face value or literal value. And as I mentioned earlier, even with evolved, right? The word evolved, broken up into two things, it's not supposed to be taken linguistically, etc., so literal, right? You have to learn how to, as they say, read between the lines, see the forest amongst the trees, as they say. But if people keep disrespecting your boundaries and then causing you to get upset and everything else, and then only capturing the part in which you're upset in the eyes of the spectator, the viewer, the person being told the story, you are the bad person if they did not see what happened before. Right? If somebody said they're going to do harm to you, etc., and then quickly reverse their speech and backtrack, well, that's an issue, and you have to have that as evidence. But if you trust somebody and you say, hey, hold on to this, and then they get rid of it, well, whom are you to trust, right? Correcting harmful behavior, right? That's another one, right? If you know somebody that's abusive and you want to, well, correct, their behavior or whatever, this is a place where limited negativity can play a part, right? Don't hit me, I will hit you back. Don't do this, I will do this. Stop trying to frame me and make me look a certain way because I am gathering proof and evidence as this goes on, and I will start recording everything. Even if my iPhone magically doesn't want to record calls anymore, I will go out and buy a tape recorder and I will freaking record every conversation just to show and utilize and to maintain proper checks and balances for those nefarious people that want to carry out malicious, scrutiny or carry out verbal or communicative attacks through malice, right? So on and so forth. So let's continue. acute performance correction. And actually, in here, it literally gives the example of surgery and aviation, so on and so forth. And I'll hold this up for you guys could see, so on and so forth. And it says it over here, and then there's surgery and aviation. So, as I stated with the TV show The Resident, right, where it was a former Marine that came in, became a doctor, and he knew about the surgeon and the other doctors that were screwing up, but they didn't want to lose their high salary. They liked their salary because it's well into the high six figures, if not mid, right? And then, of course, they would lose their license, right, with enough screw ups, with enough misdiagnoses, right? And then, of course, the hospital will be liable, right? Why didn't you correct this sooner, etc. But if money makes the world go around, then you know that greed is fueling the decisions being made in order to cover everything up. So this is, how is it? This must be specific when you're applying the negativity, right? It must be specific. It must not shame, right? Shame is another tactic utilized, right? And people tend to use shaming theory, so on and so forth, this, that, and the third. I got McDonald's, if you ever seen Eddie Murphy, right? And the kids are making fun of each other. But you have to remember and acknowledge that adults are just like big children, right? Looking for someone to guide them. So why not lead by example so they have someone to look up to, at least as an example that they can utilize, like a case study or case law or historical precedent, whatever the case may be. Make sure that it's time limited. It does not go on for years, so on and so forth. It's supposed to be done in a short amount of time, like working out and fitness. Yes, working out and fitness is great and supposed to be done over a prolonged period of time. But if you keep adding negativity and causing people to lose jobs and then pretend and then all this other stuff, trying to play a psychological operation out, so on and so forth, without caring, because somebody might say, the person who cares less in a relationship has the power. That makes idiotic fucking thinking, and it doesn't promote growth. It just keeps that person in their position so they could keep escalating. But yet the other individual that could or can't, so on and so forth, that breaks off, that does something different, that helps everyone grow and make more money, or whatever the case, to live a better life, you're picking at, you're poking fun at, you're destroying, you're trying to manipulate, etc., so on and so forth, under false pretenses, because you're scared and you weren't trained, right? That doesn't make any sense. And would that make sense in business? Would you put somebody in the role of CEO, chairman, etc., CMO, CTO, whatever, in that role if they weren't trained, couldn't handle stressful situations, couldn't handle multiple personalities, right? Because even a board of directors has people below them and a person above them, as well as investors above them. So you're going to have to deal with not only multiple personalities, people, etc., but multiple emotions. But if they're pushing against you, etc., because either they don't like you, they have it out for you, or whatever, they have a plan that's supposed to go one way and they don't like the way it's going, etc., then they're not understanding, nor do they wish to ask questions. They sit quietly in the corner observing everything, or they have you underneath heavy surveillance, tapping your phone, electronics, and everything else to make sure they have proper tabs to see if you're getting your information or guidance from somewhere else to make sure it's coming from you or not, right? Or as a security measure, as they would put it, right? So if this happens and these things aren't, well, specific, non-shaming, time-limited, paired with support and meaning, this otherwise becomes psychologically damaging. And you wonder why there's so many people with mental health issues happening and going on right now. I don't know about the military-industrial complex, but I do know that other branches of service, not so much in the Marine Corps, I didn't experience it there, but like Army, Air Force, and stuff like that, they'll carry out these things. They have large budgets, a lot of people, and, you know, they're adults that are big children, and if they get told the right thing, they'll do it, right? They need a paycheck too, right? Just like doctors in hospitals, etc., whether you work at the VA or Atrium Health, etc., right? The question you have to ask is, how do they know? Where do they get their studies, their materials, and then they cross-reference the medical journals? Probably not, because they're under instruction, not carrying out proper due diligence and practice within their field. So let's continue. Now, when it comes to a developmental perspective in human growth, For personal growth, identity formation, and individualism, right, you have methods, right? So love plus appreciation, the outcome is internal motivation. Method, encouragement creates confidence, right? You can do it, like having the child walk, just like having someone that works for you as a mentee or as a protege, so on and so forth. You give them the good cookie or whatever the case may be, right? In the TV show Suits, there's an episode where Mike Ross gets excited because Harvey Specter gave him a compliment, and that upped his performance and everything like that. And he was super excited, changed his mood and everything else. And Donna, who's Harvey's assistant, goes, "What did you say to him that he's got like that?" He goes, "I told him he did a good job." And he was in shock, right? Because he had so much scrutiny, right? But it was for character building as well as to teach him about the profession in which he wished to practice. Now, constructive feedback grows one's skills, right? But if you nullify somebody, how are they going to grow, right? And then, of course, safety and trust opens up the creativity barrier because you don't have to keep saying, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that, you're stupid, this, that, and the third. Well, if you keep reinforcing it negatively, they're never going to do it, and you're going to sit there acting retarded unless you're doing it intentionally to stop them from doing something, right? To cancel them, to detain them, to oppress them, so on and so forth, right? And then, of course, you have fear and shaming. Oh, I know what you did. Or, hey, I don't want to walk out shirtless in front of you, so on and so forth. How do you know, right? How do you know what happened? Are you trying to do some shaming tactic because you're a grown child acting like a child, so on and so forth? Do you need to get strategically reprimanded, right? Or are you saying that to see if somebody can hold their own while having metaphorical handcuffs or labels attached to them? And if they were to say something in a tone or pitch that you don't like, you can quickly go back to that safety net that someone put in place for you already, because you know that it worked for other people, so it would work for you, right? That's like taking advantage of things back in the day, like racism, right? Oh, this black person acted this way, you should arrest them. Or if they were in Africa or South Africa, because the news and media were talking about it, this white farmer was acting this way, this is Africa, they don't even look like us, so on and so forth, right? And they could use that, so on and so forth. And then the cops and law enforcement will do their job in due diligence as instructed based upon the racial, label that was put there, right? Kind of like a mental health label that somebody would get, and then people just point it out and utilize it like a get out of jail free card, like they too are not guilty for everything. It takes two or three or sometimes a group to tango. Think about it. And then, of course, chronic negativity causes trauma conditioning, right? So people with PTSD or, etc., they have trauma, right? Trauma either from physical abuse, mental abuse, or both. And that can combine to something completely different, right? Now, this holds across, childhood development, for those of you who study sociology, therapy, etc., adult learning, this helps there, right? Because when people get into business, they're a little scared. That's why they go to these business events like Unleash the Power Within, Business Mastery, both by which of Tony Robbins, the 10X Growth Con, right? VCon by Gary Vaynerchuk, and things like that. Not only to get inspired, but to learn and be around other like-minded individuals that have the potential to grow just as they do, right? Now, when it comes to leadership psychology, this plays a role. This is why the military training is a little bit more effective when it comes to business, because not everybody is taught how to mentor. And last time I checked, most of the branches get taught how to mentor people below them. And that's how they learn how to raise through the ranks, do their job proficiently, and carry and execute. So then you have rehabilitation, education, and therapy. So if your goal is to help humans grow as individuals, develop internally, and reach higher functioning, you do not lead them with negativity, right? You lead them with love, appreciation, meaning, encouragement, autonomy, supportive motivation. Negativity may control behavior, but love develops people. And after everything has happened, they will be an evolved individual, so on and so forth, right? This is not philosophy. It is established psychological and sociological fact, and it also dictates that right here on screen, and I'll come close so you guys can see, but it dictates it right there. This is not philosophical. Now, I know you guys have heard me mention class, that it's a philosophical lecture, but it does incorporate philosophy. It incorporates psychology, creativity, and all these other things, which are within the acronym, right? Psychology, sociology, medicine, all that falls underneath science, right? And science is trying to catch up to what spirituality already talks about. They're a little behind. They're just trying to understand. And when people don't understand or they fear something, they tend to, well, take up defenses and everything else. If you walk up to a house and a dog is barking, you get defensive. You don't know why the dog is barking, right? But if you get prompted like AI, oh, this dog has a mental health issue, etc., when that dog starts barking, you can now call authorities and say, I have a dog that has mental health issues, and you've been prompted, right? It's a psychological mental chess game that they like to play. So, if you want, we can continue and going further, but please smash that like button. Don't forget to share, and don't forget to follow me. Now, when it comes to other things, right? When it comes to things like leadership models, education, parenting, AI and human interaction, when it comes to exploring where systems intentionally choose fear instead of growth, right? So let's see here. Pretty sure there's a couple things within here. So, all right, let's get into this. So point number one, what the military counterterrorism training actually does, your GWOT, right? Not your SWOT analysis, your GWOT analysis, right? So someone trained on global war on terrorism, right? Or similar environments is taught to, one, recognize fear-based tactics. Two, understand how terror is used as a tool, right? Three, neutralize or counter those tactics. And then, of course, operate under extreme stress without emotional collapse. Now, of course, people will keep testing that theory in hopes that something will happen. If they don't like what one person is saying that might be former military or whatever the case may be, and they're all about causing 22 a day to happen, but under the guise of other stuff, and they plan it out over a consecutive time period, that's planned murder, and that's a crime based upon a lot of factors. And you can look that up either with a large language model if you don't have that much time, and look at what laws implicate everybody, especially if you only told them just enough to move them around like chess pieces and get them to do what you want them to do, right? If you don't give the full story to the judge will make the wrong determination. Remember that. Now, this training is reactive and defensive, not philosophical or moral instruction, right? So point two, terrorism as a psychological strategy. Here are some key points, so maybe you guys could pay attention and figure it the fuck out. Or some people like to fuck around and find out, excuse my language. But listen to some of the tactics. Let me know if they resonate or if you've ever seen those tactics play out or heard them, etc. So tactics include fear. Number two, threats, unpredictability, intimidation. So if you intimidate or you threaten people's families, their lives, whatever, their job, their well-being, etc., you're deemed a terrorist and using terroristic tactics, right? A spectacle, making something grand, right? In Suits, Harvey Specter says, why do something in public when the same thing could be achieved in private? Remember that. And then, of course, the dehumanization, right? Remember what I stated about one of the people at the hospital mentioning how somebody showed up naked or something like that, and somehow they acquired that information and they were trying to be big children just making fun of people to see if they could handle certain things, right? That's another tactic, right? And then these tactics aim to overwhelm rational decision making, right? They also destabilize populations. And if you know anything about psychological operations, they're meant to destabilize. If you studied the Vietnam War, propaganda, so on and so forth, etc., right? They also force compliance or overreaction. So if somebody is doing these things intentionally, as I stated earlier, now let's take somebody that has a mental health disorder, let's say manic, which means etc., whatever the case may be, or they're depressed, right? Or they have anxiety, and somebody does something intentionally, it'll lead to the overreaction, right? They keep doing stuff intentionally to upset you so that when you do react a certain way, it matches up to the definition of whatever it is that they stated, whether it's depression, anxiety, manic behavior, whatever, psychosis, whatever the case may be, unless they drugged you before putting you in front of a doctor, which would make you say a bunch of stuff, what's it called? And that's happened before to many people, right? These are things that will cause not only overreaction, but a disturbance in understanding what's being stated, what should actually be observed, and then things aren't going to come together correctly because it was manufactured, and anything that was manufactured by man and not nature normally has flaws in it. This is why attorneys who study things like malpractice and things like that look for these flaws, because there are always humanistic flaws within anything. Same thing goes with forensic accountants as well as forensic data specialists, so on and so forth, right? They look for the flaws, right? Because everybody thinks they know everything until they find the flaw, and then everybody panics. So yes, negativity, fear, and threat are core terror tools. Now, I will go ahead and show you here, because it's not my words, but the words from here. And I had to do a double check, right? Now, this is an outline, but you can do your own research or talk to somebody in the military and figure it out. Now, moving forward, part 3, why military training exposes people to negativity and fear. Well, think about it. If you're a military personnel or veteran and you go into business, you're going to get intimidated and have fear play out by competitors, other people in the area, the people that work for the competitors. They're going to push back. That's life. But then they set you up, and then you could see all the other actors in place as well as characters, and they may do stuff intentionally just to create your downfall, like a barrel of monkeys. One person tries to get out, but everybody else pulls them back down, because misery loves company, right? So why military training exposes people? From a psychological conditioning standpoint, military training does the following: stress inoculation, threat pattern recognition, right? Controlled use of authority of force or end force, right? So this would be understanding escalation and de-escalation, right? If somebody's intentionally doing something, intentionally saying something, you're trying to say stuff like, are you picking up what I'm laying down when I tell you to stop, or shut up, or I know already? Or are you going to wait for me to take a nap on the bed and then put up a matrix little screensaver, see if the person freaks out, so that your psychological operation is still fully intact, or whatever the case may be? Or are you just out of your mind and that clumsy and retarded? So think about that, right? And then, of course, using dominance only when necessary, either leveraging law enforcement with your known knowledge and then knowing how to manipulate your behavior like an actor does on screen so that you can get away with murder. That was a TV show. And then, of course, dominance, using reinforcement, having a strong male figure or a strong personality type to not only back you up, but also to get physical if required, making you not only feel great, but reinforcing the bad behavior, so on and so forth. And then, of course, preventing emotional decision making, right? Who cares about this? It's in the past. Who cares about that? It's in the past. If I slapped you in the face and said, why do you care right now? It's in the past. You'd probably feel emotional and you wouldn't like those words. And just as I used taboo language before, would you rather use communication and words, or would you rather have something be physical, right? And cause harm, right? Both do harm. One is psychologically, where communication comes into place, because that's based upon psychology, environment, and other things such as sociology. And then, of course, social dynamics. And then, of course, the physical aspect, the threats and everything else. Now, this is not about separating fear. It's about operating effectively when fear is already present. So if you're a former military or a veteran, in comparison to, not to knock on civilians, but the ones who haven't been through this type of training, how do you think they're going to respond when the market crashes? How do you think they're going to respond when something like COVID happens, right? They may tell you till you're blue in the face that the best alternative in the beginning of COVID is to work remotely, and you should probably make adjustments, etc. But if they're younger than you, or whatever the case may be, you may say stuff like, you don't know what you're talking about, this, that, and the third. But when it plays out, they seem like a fucking psychic or mind reader or somebody who has telepathy, whatever language you want to use. But it was because they were trained to interpret the patterns and behaviors in order to make the correct decisions to avoid harm of not only themselves, but the team and the people that they watched over, that they protected, even if it was the stupid people back home that caused these same issues, because they get to handle stuff internationally, so those people could stay domestically, continuing to fuck up and do everything else, right? Moving forward, why this works against malicious actors, right? So people who use terror rely on emotional destabilization, giving you the love bombing or the fake relationship, as I stated earlier, hiring an escort or whatever. Andrew Bustamante calls this sexpionage, etc. And they play with people's emotions and get people distraught to disturb certain patterns, right? They use things like intimidation. They'll put people in your vehicle or pop up in your life or come up to you and scare you or try to intimidate you or pull out weapons or threaten your family, etc. Panic response. They'll try to trigger anxiety or something else in order to reach the conclusion that they want to reach, whether that's proving a mental disorder or whatever, or the fact that you have PTSD and you just shouldn't be around people because you got labeled like that. But then again, nobody's going to actually question somebody with a piece of paper that says they're a doctor. But they always question drivers when it comes to accidents. Last time I checked, a license doesn't mean that you can drive correctly. It means you have the capability of keeping yourself in the vehicle in the proper lane, so on and so forth. Not that accidents aren't going to occur. Same thing with a doctorate's degree or a law degree. Doesn't mean you're the best doctor in the world and it should be taken as doctrine or truth, especially if other evidence that comes into play that plays out efficiently based upon medical journals and years of freaking research proving you wrong. So think about that, right? Yeah, you have time in service. Yeah, you have your rank, so on and so forth. Moving this over to a militaristic output in comparison to the civilian sector. But even still, if somebody gets put in a position because they're more knowledgeable, more effective, etc., you still have to understand what they're saying and you still have to listen to them. I've been in positions where people pull ranked on me. They didn't know I was in charge of a section. They didn't know I had, 15 something plus people underneath me or less. Sometimes, depending on who was put in the section, normally it capped around 14, so on and so forth. You can check the facts for that one, and so on and so forth. So I had the lives of other people's children underneath me, but they all wore different ranks, whether they were above me, below me, had more experience or whatever, but it was my responsibility, so I had to know stuff. And then when people came up, didn't matter what freaking branch you were from, you had to make sure you came correct. And if you tried to pull rank and gave me more bullshit, I would go find somebody, i.e. Master Guns, somebody who runs the section, another high-ranking officer, to tell you the same shit that I was already telling you that you need to hear because you don't respect my word, my character, my position, etc., but you might respect theirs. Now, military trained individuals are taught to not respond emotionally, to strip fear of its power, to interrupt intimidation cycles, remove the attacker's psychological leverage. In other words, you don't defeat terror with kindness alone, even though in certain areas they say to kill them with kindness, right? You defeat it by denying it the effect it has that it depends on, right? So, I mean, think about it. If you've seen this stuff play out or you know of these things playing out, well, then who's the terrorist? Is it domestic people? Is it local people? Then you know who to go after. You know who to arrest. And if they try to lie or make up some bullshit and be like, oh, well, we were just trying to like practice or like see what got this person upset or made them feel a certain way so we could keep doing it because you're like big fucking children playing with a science experiment until the science experiment blows up in your face. Let me ask you something for you entrepreneurs out there that are successful. Would you allow those people into your company, into your enterprise, into your agency? So on and so forth. If you run a marketing agency or a large corporate enterprise, whatever the case, if you knew that they were going to cause stupidity, destruction, turmoil, and everything else, no, you'd quickly escort them or relieve them of their duty or lay them off, so on and so forth, because they would harm the structure of the business. It would bring the downfall. It would create negative word of mouth. And I don't care what people say about, oh, well, there's no such thing as bad press as long as they're talking about you. When you're in business, if you have negative reviews, you can check this out on Google when it comes to their reviews. Nobody's going to want to do business with you because of everything that they learned and everything that occurred that played out, right? Now, a critical distinction. This matters not just in the military or the civilian world or business, but the same tools are not meant for personal development. The terrorist stuff, right? Not meant for personal development, not meant for leadership of civilians, education, parenting, or social cohesion, right? Why? Because fear conditions obedience, not growth. Negativity suppresses an individual. Then threat-based control creates trauma outside combat texts, right? This is why military methods do not translate cleanly into civilian life and can sometimes be misconstrued, and then people want to launch investigations because they don't know what the fuck is going on, right? So I'll show you on the screen here because some people will sometimes always dictate certain things. So you could screen capture this if you want, but it states it right there. So let's continue, shall we? Now, I told you this was going to be a lengthy video. Please smash and hit that like button, follow and share, and make sure other people that suffer or that are oppressed or whatever, or that are going through certain things that need clarity or understanding, get to see this. It would be very beneficial. At least I think so. So, moving to the last couple points here. So, from a sociological, right, perspective, role-based behavior, right? So, counterterrorism, primary tool, fear, resistance, and dominance control, right? When it comes to the context of civil society, you have trust and cooperation, education, encouragement and curiosity, leadership, psychological safety, right? A true leader makes you feel safe psychologically. But if somebody is pretending, well, then they're going to get called out, right? Parenting, attachment and guidance, right? Problems arise when combat conditioning is applied to civilian environments, or fear-based control replaces growth-based leadership, right? Historically, that leads to authoritarianism, social fragmentation, and then cycles of resentment and rebellion. What happened during the Boston Tea Party? They introduced taxes on tea and stuff like that. Now we have tariffs, everything's more expensive, they penalize people, blacklist them, make sure they can't do certain things, hinder their finances just to teach them a lesson outside of freaking, well, on top of it, planning murders, but trying to do it through the guise of, well, medication and everything else, right? Like there aren't side effects to that. And yes, some people may argue that, well, oh, there's side effects to everything, but if you were to look at certain pharmaceuticals or drugs, so on and so forth, they're literally selling you the same thing with a different name, prompting your brain to say one is for this and the other one's for that, but it's the same thing because money makes the world go round. So, final synthesis to direct answer. Yes, someone trained for counterterrorism is taught to understand, endure, and neutralize fear-based tactics because those are the tools of malicious actors, right? And those that are using those tools are 9 times out of 10 can be malicious. Why they're not behind bars? No idea. Wonder who's protecting them. I don't know. Someone anonymous. But also, the same tools are context specific and dangerous if misapplied outside of hostile environments. Black belt fever, everything else that I mentioned. Somebody might know enough to be dangerous, but they don't know exactly what they're doing, right? Then, of course, fear stops threats. Love develops humans. Both exist. They are not interchangeable, right? So, things like people have questions like why societies struggle when they're in a psychological war for too long, right? Why do veterans have issues integrating? Well, maybe because some of these tactics are playing out intentionally. I mean, if you were able to lead people and people looked up to certain individuals, but they wanted to maintain power and control, wouldn't they just get the groupthink and other individuals that work for them that have to listen to them, that or don't have to listen to them if they learn to speak the language of law and jargon in that manner, so they can say no, so on and so forth. But if they're sadistic and so on and so forth and get told a pretty story, they can cause harm possibly to innocent individuals, right? So think about that, right? And then, of course, well, if you have a strong individual that can push back against negative power and control, how much do you think those people are going to stop that individual so that they can maintain power and control, right? And then, of course, how AI and institutions must avoid defaulting to fear-based control systems, right? So messing with people's technology, right? Or messing with, like, let's say their WhatsApp and making stuff flash by to either put them in a hypnotic state, throw them off, or whatever. Or messing with their let's say their TV, their Roku, right? They're watching something like WWE SmackDown and The Rock comes out, but then his face changes as someone's laughing and it's someone you recognize, and then it switches back, right? Now, these things do play out, right? If you've seen the movie Ocean's 13, there's something called, they did in there, it says, oh, we got to run a carousel. So, who is it? Don Cheadle comes in and he's speaking to Benedict, right? The character in there. And what they're doing is that they're manipulating the visuals of the faces of the crew on their security system. And you could see that play out. Now, what if that was done with leveraging AI to cause people to put them into a psychological state and then get them to sound crazy if they try to reiterate this without proof, without evidence, without something else, etc., and without somebody actually knowing that that technology exists? Don't you think that would be a little questionable if that information came out correctly and people understood it? What would they do to those individuals? Think about it. So, till next time, my friends, this has been a very long video of Finding Freedom, but I hope it clarifies some things. Yes, it's going to go into the ether, the open source on YouTube or whatever. So those of you who like open source information, social grooming and all that, you don't need to dig or anything. You can just watch the video, so on and so forth. Those of you who like to hide or whatever and cause drama for people, well, there it is, right? Those of you who have questions but never actually got an understanding or breakdown, well, maybe this video helped you. Maybe this video gave you some clarity as to why you should ask questions, why you should sometimes say no, even though you think you cannot, right? So, till next time, love you guys. Flying V, if you guys see Mighty Ducks. So, I'll talk to you guys later. Peace.